Hey guys, welcome to Ask My Auto Mechanic. So in this video, we're going to be testing an alternator to see if this car here has a bad alternator. You're going to find this video helpful if you're having a problem with your car and you suspect the alternator might be going out and isn't charging your battery properly. What I'm going to do is show you guys how to test that to see if your alternator may be your problem on your vehicle. Now, if you're looking for a video on how to change an alternator, this is not really it. I'll give you a couple tips in this video, but this is mainly how to test to see if your alternator is bad. All right guys, so one of the first things you want to do when checking the alternator on your vehicle is to make sure that you have your battery tested before you do it. Now, make sure that your battery is completely charged and or replaced before you test the output of your alternator. And then another thing you want to do to make sure your alternator is getting the power that it needs, make sure you check all the fuses. So on this little Civic here, you've got a fuse box right next to the battery. Inside there is going to be different fuses. You also have fuses underneath the dash in the fuse box in there. Make sure you locate the correct fuse for the alternator, turn the ignition on without starting it, and check that fuse. One way to do that is with a test light. Now, test lights are really simple in that you can check fuses really easily. What you do is you put this little tip on the one side of the fuse, the little metal part, and then you stick it on the other side. And if you get the light to light up, like if I take this fuse here, this little 10 amp fuse, you can see I've got it on one side and the light is lit up there. And then if I go to the other side and check it, if the light lights up, I know that that fuse is good. If it didn't light up on the other side, it only lights up on one side, that means that the fuse is bad, you want to replace it. So check your battery, have that tested at a parts store or something like that, make sure it's charged. Check your alternator charging fuse to make sure that that is a good fuse there. All right guys, so to test the output of the alternator, what we're going to do is we're going to use this voltmeter here. You don't need a high dollar voltmeter, just a voltmeter to test the volts at the battery. Again, make sure your battery is fully charged before you do this, and then go ahead and start the car and put these two terminals on here on the battery, and then check the voltage output right at the battery. All right guys, so you can see I've got the voltmeter hooked up to the battery here. Now the engine's not running, and we're running at 12.33 volts there without the car started. Now, once you start the car, the alternator is supposed to kick in and run this battery up to about 14.4 volts, depending on if your headlights are on and things like that. It's always best when you're checking the alternator to go ahead and turn the headlights on when starting the engine to give it a little bit of a load to see what the voltage reads at. Now, if you're reading somewhere between about 13.5 and 14.4 volts, then the alternator is most likely just fine and is giving the battery plenty of volts to recharge it. All right guys, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start the engine and see if the volts comes up. I'm going to turn the headlights on, I'm going to start it and see what kind of voltage the alternator is actually pushing out. All right guys, I've got the headlights onto the car and I've got this thing starting and running. We're actually running at about 11.94, 11.95 volts. So the car's electrical system is actually pulling more volts off the battery. The alternator is definitely not giving any extra charge to the battery to keep it running. All right, so we know that the alternator is not pushing anything out. Now, what we don't know is the alternator being commanded to turn on. So this is a new alternator. I've already tested this car. I know that the alternator is bad, so I already picked one of these up. And basically, they're fairly simple to install. Once you get to them, it just has two main bolts on this model that hold it in place. Some of them have 3 or 4 bolts that hold them in place. And then you notice it has this positive terminal here. So this is what they consider the charge wire post. And what you have is a fairly big battery cable that comes off the end of this post, and this sends the electricity out to the battery to charge it. So you want to take your multimeter and check the charge output right here, rather than just at the battery. After you've checked at the battery, you want to locate where the alternator is and carefully check the power output when it's running. If you've got 14 volts coming out of the alternator, but you don't have that voltage at the battery, that means you have a problem between the alternator and the battery. The cable or something has got some resistance in it. So you do want to check the output right from the alternator. The other thing that you want to do is check these pins here. So there is an electrical connector that plugs into the back of this. And one of the wires commands this thing to actually turn on. There's actually a couple there that tell this thing to charge. If the alternator is not receiving the signal to tell it to charge, then it won't turn on. It won't put any output on it. There's also wires that come out of it that go to the lights in the dash to give the battery voltage to the dash, a little gauge or light indicator, whatever that's there. But the main thing you've got to determine, is this thing being told to charge? So you've got to test the wire that tells it to charge. Okay, to test the wire that is going to the alternator to make it charge, what I've done here is I've taken a test light, and you can see this orange wire that I've tapped to the back of the alternator. Now this orange wire is not normally there, it's just there to show you guys that this wire is sending power to the back of the alternator from the car. Now I've just taken a little T-tap there and tapped onto the factory wire and ran the orange wire up and over to the test light just to show you guys that it's actually getting power when the car is running and it's turned on. Okay, so we have the car running. Let's check to see if the computer is sending the alternator the voltage to turn it on. Okay, yeah, so you can see that this test light here is lighting up. That means that this wire that's telling the alternator to turn on is getting the signal, and it's lighting up our test light. However, if you look at the multimeter here, we've only got 11.95 volts, which means the alternator is not putting power to the battery. And the alternator is definitely bad. All right guys, so we know that our alternator is bad. It's not charging the battery. So we need to change this thing. And then once I change the alternator, I'll retest the output right there at the battery to make sure we're getting the proper charge voltage when we're all done. All right guys, so this is not really a video on how to change the alternator, but more to test it. However, now I'm gonna go through and change the alternator, basically take off the alternator drive belt, undo all the connections to the alternator. Make sure you disconnect the battery first before you start this repair. And then take the belt off, undo all the connections, unbolt the alternator, put the alternator back on, tighten up the belt, reinstall the belt and tighten it up, hook your battery back up, and then check to see if we've got charge voltage. So let's get after this. I'll put it on a quick little maybe GoPro time lapse of changing the alternator, and we'll get this done. Finally got the stupid thing out. So much fun. If you're working on this 99 Honda Civic model like I am, don't bother trying to pull the alternator up through the top. This would be much easier to do if you have hoist. So go ahead and raise the vehicle up off the ground with jack stands and pull it out through the bottom, but make sure you take the bracket that holds the bottom of the alternator out, and that'll make this come right out of the fender well. All right guys, so we got this thing all finished up. I've got the alternator all bolted back up, the belt's adjusted. I've got all the electrical connectors hooked up. So we'll go ahead and hook up the battery and retest it with the multimeter to see what kind of voltage we're getting out of the charging system. All right guys, moment of truth here. We've got the multimeter hooked up to the battery. We've got 12.37 volts. Let's see what kind of voltage we get now that we've got the new alternator on the car. Fire this baby up. Generally ideal out of an alternator is 14.4 volts. So there you have it. We weren't charging before we changed the alternator. We're charging now. Alright guys, thanks for watching Ask My Auto Mechanic. I hope you found this video useful and it helped you. Go ahead and hit that like button if it did. Subscribe to my channel for more auto mechanic related type questions and tips. Also, if you're looking for more how-to type videos, I have another YouTube channel, DIY Bri. Go ahead and check that out. I'll put that in the link below or somewhere at the end of the video. Also, any tools that I might use throughout my projects or in my videos, I'll put those in links below the video, so make sure you check out that along with other helpful tips.